Should you be buying a house? Seems to be the question in the news that's on everybody's mind these days, especially with the current average 30-year fixed mortgage interest rate being 7.89 as of October 2023. Before we dive deeper into this topic, it isn't a simple question to even answer. Someone's thinking about whether to buy a house or not. It really depends on a lot of different factors. Their income, where they want to live, the supply and the demand, where they actually are looking for housing, lots of other factors that it would take multiple videos to even try to explain. I'm going to narrow down this conversation and just look at it from two different lenses. First perspective is from the point of view of someone who recently purchased a house. That would be me. And I'll tell you what are some of the factors I looked at when making my decision, why I ended up purchasing at the time that I did. To be totally transparent, it wasn't my first house, but it was the house where, it was time for me to settle down and have a family. And there were a whole bunch of other factors, which I'll explain later on in the video. So you have to stay tuned. The second perspective is through the lens of my little sister and my little cousins who are starting the process of trying to buy a house. Some of the factors that they should be taking a look at, and if I was in their shoes, that I would want somebody to share with me. Now, interest rates are just insanely high, according to a recent article in Fortune, dated August 22nd. So still relevant. On Monday, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate reached 7.48, marking the highest level since the year 2000. Even prior to this recent surge in mortgage rates, housing affordability, as monitored by the Atlanta Fed, has already deteriorated beyond the levels seen at the housing bubble peak in 2006. Once this latest mortgage rate surge is factored in, August 2023 will become the worst month for housing affordability this century. That's wild. I mean, Olivia, like you and I already talked about affordability in Canada and affordability in London. And it seems like we're slowly getting to the point where it's almost the same thing for affordability or housing in the US. And at some point those it'll come back down. But I feel like when the rates were low, like when I was searching for a house not too long ago, that's when the bidding wars happened because of the supply and demand. And so even though interest rates were relatively low, houses were like $100,000 over what they were really worth on the market. And so it still wasn't affordable even with the lower interest rates. So I feel like it's no winning, especially if you make less than multiple six figures.
I'm lucky that I have both. Well, I don't know about lucky, but I have two perspectives of the Canadian market and the UK market, and it's exactly the same. Back home in Canada, it's kind of that bidding war and the housing demand have always been quite high, even from when I was a kid. But the prices just keep going higher and higher over there. Where I believe where I'm from, Vancouver, is the third most expensive city in the world. Just completely priced out. I can't afford it, and I make some decent money. My dad can't afford it. He makes decent money. It's one of those things where back home, if you're almost not born into money, it is quite difficult to even buy. And in the UK, it really depends on, where you live. Obviously, if you're based in London, same sort of thing. It's, if you're from a wealthy family or you make millions, then you're fine. But anything almost less than that, you're going to struggle, or maybe not end up with a very great place that will need a lot of work, and isn't ideal. So it's pretty much the same over here.
Yeah, stuff's just not affordable. It's like if the question that we're answering in this video is, should you buy? Even that only applies to a subset of people, assuming that other factors are already in place, like you're making a good income, you've been able to save, you don't need to go into the office. The prerequisites aren't answered, then the answer is it's not even like a chance, right? So the median price today is $430,000. That's a substantial amount of money. Even if you can afford it, like let's say you make six figures and you can afford it and you buy when the interest rates are relatively low, that still means nothing can go wrong. Like you can't have a busted heater, your car can't break down, you can't be in a whole bunch of debt, you can't have a debilitating disease or any one of those factors, because then it prices you out even more. You probably want to start to catch the housing market as it's coming down, because you want to buy right before the bidding wars start to happen if you're choosing to try to live in a big city or something along those lines. Bro, what is this guy talking about? It's afford. So, I think the market just has to crash, essentially, because I don't know. But then when it goes down, it probably won't go down as low as it was back in 2022 anyway. So, all right, well, I guess we're not going to solve that today. The next factor that should be taken into consideration is housing inventory. What does the supply and demand look like? And for that, we'll take a look at bankrate.com. All right, so why is there a housing shortage? Rising materials costs, supply chain issues, and labor shortages stemming from COVID-19 all negatively impacted housing inventory. But the problem existed long before the pandemic. Essentially, the U.S. has failed to keep up with housing demands on a continual increasing population, particularly when it comes to millennials, a huge demographic who are now at prime home buying age. One factor that exacerbates the shortage is the prevalence of institutional investors who buy up a large portion of housing inventory for profit. These investors accounted for more than 13% of all the residential real estate purchases in 2021, according to a 2022 NAR study removing those units from the pool of availability for individual buyers. So once again, so let's talk about that. There aren't enough houses, and now you have companies like BlackRock, Invitation Homes, and other corporate investors buying up the single family homes and then renting them back to families, which makes the problem even worse than it currently is. So, and I think, was it Canada that banned international investors for buying up? Is one of these states that just actually banned international investors from buying, which I guess hasn't helped based on our previous conversations, but I guess it hasn't worsened per se to where you have institutions buying up everything.
In Vancouver in particular, so in Vancouver, a lot of prices were driven up by foreign buyers and foreign investors. So now they have something called a foreign buyer tax, which is an additional tax put on the property included in your purchase price. So that's something they have done, and while it's put more properties on the market and kind of stopped them from being snapped up, but it hasn't dropped any prices. They're still going up because these people they have the money to raise prices and buy a house and outbid everyone else, but they just pay that extra tax on top of it. So it hasn't really done much, to be honest with you.
Right, at the end, at the end of the day, if it's, I don't know what that tax is. I'm kind of curious.
So with this one, it depends on which province you're from, so kind of a state. So where I'm from, Vancouver, it's based in BC. It's 15% tax on top of what you're paying.
Okay, that's substantial.
It looks like in Ontario, it's 25%.
Even though to live in British Columbia, you still got to be balling. So yeah, I think the main point here is the fact that, there's a housing shortage with supply and demand. There aren't enough houses, but there are some areas where I was reading this one article in the New York Times that talked about where there are big cities where things are still affordable, and they use Tokyo as an example. And one of the things that stood out for me is the fact that because of zoning laws, in the US, where you can't take down historical buildings, etc., or the fact that wealthy people just don't want to allow apartment complexes or multifamily units to be built in their neighborhoods. But whereas in Tokyo, right, that's allowed, and they look to build as much housing as possible, even over parks and things like that. So there are some pros and some cons to it. But at the end of the day, because of zoning laws and because of where builders are allowed to build, that really is going to determine whether or not there is more affordable housing, especially in cities and places that are currently just really unaffordable. One of the things that stood out from this article, talking about a family moving, but they were hey, they rent a 2-bedroom apartment for 150 yen per month, or about $1,000. That's insane. All right, so the third point, let's talk about the fact that income hasn't kept pace with inflation. According to this article, there's one undeniable fact about the U.S. housing market. It's just not affordable for the vast majority of potential home buyers, according to a VP of Data and Analytics at Black Knight. U.S. incomes would have to increase by a whopping 55% for the housing market to be considered affordable. 3 different things would have to happen, or a combination of them, right? Either a 35% correction in price, a 4% decline in mortgage rates, or 55% growth in income, or some sort of combination of those factors. And right now, it doesn't seem like any one of those is going to happen, right? You're not going to get a 55% increase in income anytime soon, because that typically just doesn't happen. There isn't going to be a 35% correction on the market. And the Fed is still hiking interest rates. They may start to go down next year, but that's not guaranteed. So I guess where does that leave us? Until the Fed starts to drop interest rates or wages start to rise, even though I don't think they're going to rise to 55% increase anytime soon, or there's more supply than there is demand for housing, the United States is probably going to become a nation of renters, like other places in the world where real estate is too expensive to actually purchase. So I bought in 2022, I think July 2022. And the factors that motivated me to buy was the fact that I was ready to settle down and have a family. I wanted to have a child. I had already saved up for a down payment. I work in tech. Last year, my income was $400,000. And so I felt like I was in a stable financial situation. I had the money saved up to buy a house, and there was a reason and a motivation that I wanted to buy. I wanted to make sure that, when I pass, that I left my child something, and I didn't want my child to be someone who had to rent. So I wanted to have a house fully paid off. It was an emotional decision for me to actually be motivated enough to actually go and purchase, because I could have rented for a long time and just continue to stack and invest money. That's the reason why I decided to actually purchase a house. Now, that said, here's a few takeaways from this video. If the reasons why I bought aren't similar to yours, then you should probably wait. The interest rates will come down, and that should help to increase the housing affordability, at least from getting approved and getting more house. I've recently been reading this series called The Hunt in the Washington Post, where it just talks about different solutions for different people, right? So there's one sister who bought a condo for $650K in Washington, D.C., but then her sister's paying her like $1,500 worth of rent. Another couple was living in the U.S., but then they moved to Mexico and bought a house bought a condo for $170K, and were able to pocket some of the money from the house that they sold in their current location. There's also a lot of data on Redfin that shows that there are cities that are less expensive than others, right? Meaning that you can take a look at where cities people are migrating to and be one of those people that migrate. And yes, I know it's not easy to move, but if you can't afford in the city that you currently live in and housing is important to you, then it probably makes sense to take a look at moving to one of the cities where you can afford, structuring your goals to make it to where you can actually afford housing and being an owner. And then the last area I would say is keep upskilling and looking for better opportunities, whether that's working on a side hustle or improving your skills to move up in your current career. I would say I got to this point by doing that. I mainly focused on improving my skills, moving up in my career to the point where I was making enough income, could save for a down payment. And then that's why I recently decided to purchase and settle down and buy a house. So gave you guys a lot today, right? We went over a lot of different things, but that's all I have for this video. Hopefully some of those takeaways are helpful. I don't think there's an easy solution when it comes to buying a house. I think that's the decision that you have to, make. You have to take a look at all the factors that were discussed and make a decision that's best for you at the time, right? Income, interest rates, a whole bunch of factors, and sometimes it's just emotional. Purchasing a place is a very emotional decision, and it depends on, there's a lot of different factors, so no one can really give you the advice on when to actually buy. They can just do what I did in this video, which is just lay out all the options for you, and then you have to do some thinking for yourself as to when you decide to make that decision. Hopefully you find content like this helpful. If you do, make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.